So a few weeks ago, I tested the cheapest pizza oven I could find. And while it did turn out some decent pizza, my ultimate conclusion was that I'm better off just using my home oven. At least for the styles of pizza that I like to make. But since then, I found another option that looks like it's gonna be quite a bit better. And although it's quite a bit more expensive than the other one, it's still a lot cheaper than most other options out there. And it seems to have quite a few advantages over a home oven, at least in theory, but we won't know for sure until we give it a try. So this one's a biggie, as you can see, but that's also kind of the reason I wanted it. So let's take a look. So the stone came intact, that's a good sign. Better than the last oven I tested. I probably made that look way harder than what it needed to be, but pretty nice. I like this door a lot better than the other one I had. The other one you kind of had to lift and latch it on. This one, super easy. It's kind of like spring loaded. Again, feels pretty good quality. Now I mentioned that the size was one of the main reasons I bought this, and that's because this thing can actually bake 18-inch pizzas. At least that's what they claim. 17 3/4. Close enough, I guess. Based on some of the reviews, I was a little skeptical about how the quality would be, but already it's night and day between this one and the Vivor one that I tested before. It actually feels like a pretty solid product. I mean, it's not gonna be like as high quality as a $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 oven, but for $700, for this size, definitely not too bad. And the other main advantage of this one is that it actually claims to get up to 840 degrees Fahrenheit. And not only that, but it has controllable both top and bottom heating elements, so I can really dial in the balance between the top and the bottom of the pizza. Actually, wait, so on further inspection, you can't actually individually control the temperatures of the top and bottom heating element. I thought this top one here was a separate temperature gauge, but it's actually just a timer. What you can do is you set the overall temperature of the oven, and then you could turn off and on the top heating element as need be, which I guess is fine. I really would have preferred if you could individually control each temperature, but this should work fine. I think what I'll do is just keep the top heating element on at all times, because in theory that should heat up the stone anyways, and you should really only need to use the bottom heating element if you're baking a bunch of pizzas back to back. Now it also comes with legs, which I still have to screw on here, and it's also always recommended to run a new oven for at least an hour or so to kind of season it and get any of that factory chemical residue off. So I'm gonna do that, and then we're gonna bake some pizza. All right, not sure if this is the recommended approach, but I put this thing in my kitchen for a couple of reasons. The first is so I could put it under my hood here, but the second is because in my kitchen I have 20 amp circuits. Now I'm not an electronics expert, but this oven takes 1700 watts, and based on what I understand, a typical 15 amp circuit at 120 volts can only handle up to 1800 watts, which is cutting it a little bit close with this oven. So with this 20 amp circuit, I think I can handle about 2400 watts, which should give me plenty of wiggle room. But anyways, let's talk about how we're gonna bake with this thing. So like I mentioned, the maximum temperature here is 840 degrees Fahrenheit. And I already did that initial seasoning step the other day. And when I did that, I had both the top and bottom burners active, and I set it to the maximum temperature. And it took just about an hour to get all the way up to 10. But it was evident right away that the stone was way too hot, just kind of as I suspected. So when I'm actually baking this pizza, what I'm gonna do is only activate the top burner. So obviously the stone is still gonna get hot because I mean it's still in the oven, but without the heat coming from underneath it, hopefully it won't get hot quite as quickly. Ideally, I think I want a stone temp around maybe 700 or 750. I'm not 100% sure because I've never baked in an oven that gets this hot, but that's just my initial assumption. I'm just gonna keep an eye on it. I'm actually really curious to see how long it takes to heat up with just that one burner. All right, so about an hour later, this oven was still only up to like 575 degrees Fahrenheit. So I gave it like another 20 minutes or so, and it's still only sitting at about 600. So I don't think this method is gonna work. I guess I have no choice but to turn on that bottom burner. In the meantime though, while I was waiting for this oven to heat, I got a delivery of this new 18-inch pizza peel, because before I only had the 16-inch one. However, I noticed a pretty big problem with this. It doesn't fit. Because even though this oven claims to be 18 inches, the opening is more like 17 and a half, which is a big enough difference that you can't use an 18-inch peel. And since no one really makes 17-inch peels, I'm probably just gonna cut this one down myself, specifically to use with this oven. That's gonna take some time though, so for today, I'm just gonna use my 16-inch one. So after about another 20 minutes of heating, my oven was up over 700 degrees. So I shaped my dough, and here I'm using what's probably my favorite dough recipe. Basically a high hydration version of my New York style pizza. So I topped it with my New York style sauce, followed by some grated pecorino, and finally some whole milk low moisture mozzarella. Then I slid the pizza off, and in this oven, the pizza baked in just about 5 minutes, and I rotated it halfway through to ensure even baking. All right, so definitely doesn't look too bad for the first bake. Not exactly the result I was looking for though. I underestimated sort of how tight that space would be, so even trying to make this 17-inch pizza is not super easy. And the last problem that I noticed before I actually tried this pizza is the bottom got pretty burnt. So my stone had gotten up to probably like 800 degrees by the time I stretched the dough and moved my camera around and all that type of thing. So it's definitely too hot. But even so, let's give it a try and see what we're working with. Yeah, so despite the burntness on the bottom, this actually is a really good pizza. I mean, definitely different than anything I can make in my home oven. Not to say it's necessarily better than anything I can make in my home oven, at least not yet. I think we might be able to get there with this oven because I'm actually really happy with the sort of browning I was able to get on top. I think it's got just that little bit of charring without being burnt, and it's not too uniform and brown. Like, it's kind of got a little bit of that leopard spotting type effect, which personally I do like. And now that I'm thinking about it, I do have another theory for how I might be able to make a better pizza. But first, it's time for a quick coffee break, thanks to this video's sponsor, Trade. So if you've been watching this channel for a while, you know that I'm a pretty big coffee enthusiast, and I've been using Trade basically since the beginning. Because the most important step to making great coffee is to use freshly roasted beans. Ideally roasted no more than 3 or 4 weeks ago, which is a stark contrast to your typical grocery store coffee that's been roasted at least a few months ago by the time it hits the shelves. By that point, it's already stale, and the flavor difference is night and day. And that's where Trade comes in. Trade Coffee delivers freshly roasted, personally curated coffees straight to your door, enabling you to make your best cup of coffee at home every single day. Trade's algorithm will pick coffees that best suit your taste out of their over 450 different choices, and the beans will always be shipped within 48 hours of roasting to make sure they're as fresh as possible. For me, I told Trade that I prefer lighter roasts, but I also want to be surprised with new and unique flavors, and I'm honestly never disappointed. My most recent coffee is from Blueprint Coffee in St. Louis. It's a naturally processed coffee from Uganda, and it's absolutely delicious with strong fruity notes and chocolatey undertones. And what I also love about Trade is that it's super flexible and easy to use. You can set any delivery frequency you like, and it's easy to delay an order if you need to, or even to expedite an order if you're running low on coffee sooner than expected. And right now, you can receive a free bag of coffee with any Trade subscription using my link in the description below. So thanks a lot to Trade for sponsoring this video, and thank you for your support. Now, let's make this pizza. So this time, I tried using only the top burner, even though I knew the oven wouldn't get hot enough, because I figured that maybe the intensity of the top burner set to maximum heat would be enough to sort of broil the pizza. But it wasn't. Even after about a 7-minute bake, the top crust was still undercooked due to the lower oven temperature, and the bottom had almost zero crispness, leading to a pretty floppy pizza. So I kept going, trying again and again and again, and nothing quite seemed to be working. So at some point, I had to start rethinking my method. So I mean, I think that with a little more tweaking, I can achieve a passable result, but I would basically have to just bake at lower temperatures for longer periods of time, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of using this type of oven. But as I kept thinking about it, I had a pretty big realization, which made me think I might be approaching this whole thing wrong. So we already know that in a home oven, generally steel works better than stone. And that's because steel has a higher thermal conductivity, basically meaning that it transfers its heat really well to whatever it comes in contact with. In this case, the bottom of our pizza. But we also know that once you get too high in temperature, above about 600 degrees, that conductivity is actually a little bit too high. And in that case, you're actually better off using stone so that you don't burn the bottom of the pizza. But I'm also finding that there comes a temperature where even stone is a little bit too conductive. It seems to be when you reach right about 750 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm thinking that there must be material that works even better than this corderite stone at those higher temperatures. And obviously there must be, because Neapolitan-style pizzas are baked anywhere between 800 and 1000 degrees and they don't burn. And that's because they use a material called Biscotto stone. It's not actually a stone, it's like a clay material, but it has a very low thermal conductivity, almost a tenth of your typical corderite pizza stone. But there are a few problems with it still. The first is that, like I said, Neapolitan-style pizzas are baked between about 800 and 1000 degrees, whereas with my oven, I'm maxing out at probably about 800 by the time you account for heat loss from opening and closing the oven. So this might not actually be conductive enough for what I need. And normally I would just go ahead and buy one and give it a try, but these things are pretty expensive and they're shipped from Italy, so by the time you take into account shipping, it cost me like $260 for the stone I need. So I don't think it would really make sense for me to buy one of these right now, because I actually found another option. On my trusty pizzamaking.com time, I found an old thread where people were walking through the different thermal conductivities, and there was actually a material introduced that I hadn't heard of before. It's called fibrament, and it actually has a conductivity between cordierite and those Biscotto stones. And conveniently, it comes in a size that should be perfect for my oven, and it's only $87. 3 business days later, my stone is here. Maybe just a smidge smaller than the one it came with, but otherwise pretty much a perfect fit. So go ahead and heat this oven and see what we're working with. Alright, so of course I got a phone call right after I put this one on the peel. So that kind of stuck and the shape turned out a little funky. But with that aside, when we take a look at the bottom, it's easily the best pizza yet. I think this stone was still close to 800 degrees by the time I put it in the oven. So I'm pretty impressed that it didn't burn too badly. Honestly, this is kind of how I like it. I know some people would say it's a little bit too well done. One thing I am a little confused about though is the top crust. Obviously there's a lot less browning here than I got on my previous pizzas. Despite the lack of browning though, still pretty good crispness on the top. Wow, so that bottom crust is super crisp. This is probably about a 75% hydration dough. And it's been out of the oven for like 10 or 12 minutes, but that crispiness isn't going anywhere. A lot of that was probably because this was actually a pretty long bake time. Since I wasn't seeing that browning on the top crust, I left it in for about 7 minutes. So again, pretty impressive that the bottom crust didn't burn even for that long of a bake. I would like to get that shorter. My ideal range is kind of like 4 to 6 minutes, because honestly, this might even be a little too crisp. Regardless of all that though, I'm not quite convinced that it makes sense to buy one of these if you're only making pizza at home. Because for me, I actually bought it for a different reason. Because I've mentioned it before on this channel, but I'm starting to do some pizza pop-up events. And so I needed an oven that I could bring around with me and get consistent results with. If you want to find out about my events, you can follow me on Instagram. But anyways, I think this oven will be pretty decent for my needs. The main thing I'm concerned about though is the recovery time. When I threw the pizza in, it was at about 800 degrees and it dropped all the way to about 600 by the time the pizza was done baking. So with this current setup, I couldn't really bake pizza after pizza repeatedly, but I do have a couple ideas for how I'm gonna fix that. In the meantime though, I need to put this oven to another test because I mentioned that it might not be necessary for this style of pizza since you can achieve pretty good results in a home oven, but the true test of any pizza oven is whether it can make a Neapolitan-style pizza. So I've got my Neapolitan-style pizza here. And the reason I was really curious to try this one out is because you may know, but Neapolitan-style pizza typically uses 00 flour, which is not malted, unlike most American flours which are malted. Basically meaning it doesn't brown as quickly. And so even if my other dough couldn't handle the highest temperature of this oven, this pizza might be able to. Also, it bakes for a shorter period of time. This one baked in about 2 minutes and 15 seconds. So still longer than the 60 to 90 seconds that you'd want with a traditional Neapolitan-style pizza, but overall, not too bad. Let's take a look and see what we're working with. So definitely a pretty solid pizza. It is significantly crisper than what you'd want with a Neapolitan style pizza. I probably could have gone a little bit higher on the hydration. With this one I did 62%, but I guess given the longer bake time, I could have gone up to maybe 65 or 67%. But the biggest problem with it is the bottom is still pretty burnt. I was kind of surprised that was the case even with such a short bake, but immediately when I put the pizza in the oven, I could smell it burning. So I think even taking it out sooner really wouldn't have fixed that issue. Again, I can maybe try fiddling with the settings, like turning off the bottom burner once the pizza's in the oven, but it's not exactly an ideal solution. I wish that I did have one of those Biscotto stones. That might be the piece that would fix this. Like I said though, those things are just super expensive. I mean, buying one would be like a third of what I spent on the oven itself, so I just don't know that it's worth. All right, I'll give it a try. So it came packed really well, as you can see. It's supposed to be in 2 pieces. I don't know why exactly they do that. Probably the material just isn't strong enough to support being a bigger piece, I guess. But based on the dimensions online, it should fit this oven perfectly. What we do need to do is cure this stone before it's ready to use. Now, all of these instructions are in Italian, Pulire il biscotto con un pano umido ben straccio por rumere. Let me translate this here. Clean the biscuit. They call it a biscuit. But I think it's pretty self-explanatory. It's saying 100 degrees Celsius for 90 minutes. And then you turn the oven up to 150 degrees Celsius for another 90 minutes. And then up to 200 degrees Celsius for another 60 minutes. And then this probably says let it cool before using. So I'm not gonna have pizza today, but I'm gonna do that curing process, make some more dough because the one I made before kind of sucked, and I'll be back tomorrow. All right, so I've got my final pizzas here. And as you can see, I made 2 and they look pretty significantly different. So we'll get into that in a minute. I think this dough turned out a lot better than the last batch though. I used a little bit of a higher hydration and a bit more yeast as well. So let me start by giving them a try. So they're both pretty solid slices, but as you can probably tell just by looking at it, this one's definitely better. The bottoms of them are both really nice, but with this one there's almost no browning on the top, whereas this one looks pretty good. And the interesting thing is this one was actually baked in the pizza oven. The thing is though, I'm pretty sure my oven died on me right before I threw this in the oven. I noticed when I went to throw it in that I wasn't able to turn the light on, so I tried resetting the fuse, basically trying anything I could think of, and I couldn't get it to work again. So of course the stone was still hot, but I wasn't getting any heat from the top. So obviously that's a pretty big issue. I'm still gonna have to try to figure this out, see if it's dead or maybe it was just some sort of overheating protection. So I'll jump in here with a little update. All right, future Charlie here. So it turns out the oven does in fact still work. What I found is that there's a reset button on the back of it, and when I tried pressing that button at first, it didn't work. But after I let the oven cool for about an hour and a half, I tried the reset button again and it fixed the issue I was having. So it does seem to be some sort of overheat protection, which I guess is a good thing. And once I got the oven back up and running, it did turn out a pretty decent Neapolitan-style pizza. And to be fair, I'm probably like 90% sure that the overheating was because I had the oven set over top of my real oven, which was also set to its highest temperature. And the reason I was doing that was because of this second pizza. This one was actually baked in my normal oven. And as you can see, the result was actually pretty good. What I did was set my baking steel to the highest rack and then preheat my oven for about 60 minutes. Then right before I threw this thing in, I cranked the broiler onto high, slid the pizza in, and it baked in about 3 minutes. I just rotated it a couple times throughout the process. So I mean, considering this, it really doesn't make sense to buy anything like that at home. I do think that Biscotto stone gave it a more authentic Neapolitan style feel, but it's not a big enough difference to justify the cost and the amount of space that thing takes up. I was hoping to use it for my pizza pop-up events. We'll have to see if I can even do that. But I think this goes to show that you can pretty much bake any style of pizza at home with just a little bit of ingenuity and testing. Speaking of which, if you want to see how I make my New York style pizza, you can check out that video right here. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next one.